Hey Gemma, what does Flayer do?
I don't know, I just make swords.
Oh, well, fair enough.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, Monster Hunter Wilds is an incredible game in so many different ways, but there is at least one specific area that simply needs improving, and that is the descriptions of skills. Some skills are incredibly vague about what they actually do, some of them are straight up wrong in the description, sometimes there are localization or translation issues that cause confusion, and sometimes there are just simply unexpected interactions that exist with the skill that make it really hard to even know if it is a bug or not in the first place. So today, let's talk about the 9 or so skills that fit this description right now in Wilds, either from my own testing personally or just hearing other players talk about it, and then I'll test it myself and talk about what this actually means for you as a player. For the most part, I'll be going in alphabetical order of the skills, with the exception of 2 that go into slight spoiler territory for some endgame high rank monsters, which will be put at the end just in case you are not at that point yet but still want to know about the other skills on the list. As well, worth noting, all of this testing was redone the day that this video is releasing, so it is up to date with the current patch as of March 10th. Starting off with the burst skill, this increases raw attack and element attack after successive hits. And it's not clear whether this is a bug or not, but it's not specified by the skill. The element bonus does not seem to apply to elemental bowgun ammo. This sort of makes sense given that element for bowgun shots is typically defined by the ammo specifically rather than the weapon itself, but it's worth noting that this is a thing, it's a way that the skill works, and so burst with elemental bowgun is pretty much just not a thing at the moment, despite the initial inclination to expect that should work together well. Next up is Charge Master. This skill is functional as far as I can see from my testing, but it doesn't give proper numbers in the description of it, and from the testing that I've done, the actual value of the skill is so incredibly low, to the point that it may as well be a bug if it isn't one, because it's just having that little of an effect. It's to the point where against the training dummy, which is weaker to element than most monsters are, it is less than a 3% overall damage increase on a hit with a charged attack on an element weapon than not having the skill for the exact same attack. Obviously this is skewed a bit because the hits will have raw on them as well, so it is increasing the element by more than 3%, but if it is only 3% increase to the overall damage of the attack, then it is pointless for a whole weapon skill. And so essentially this is just to let you know that in its current state, Charge Master as a skill is not worth using. Then we have Counterstrike, and this one has a few very powerful and unexpected interactions. Counterstrike gives you bonus attack after being knocked back by an attack, as it reads, and in Rise and Sunbreak this meant any attack that actually knocked you back properly sent you flying, so you couldn't cause it with iframes or with hyper armor or with counters or things like that. In Monster Hunter Wilds, however, that still applies to most of the things I just listed, but not all. For example, Great Sword Shoulder Tackle will activate the Counterstrike skill in Wilds, as well as Switch Axe's Counter Rising Slash while in Sword mode as well. These are the only 2 weapon-specific interactions that I'm aware of, but that means that both of these weapons can get really high uptime on Counterstrike as a skill without needing to be hit by the monster properly, making the skill way better for these weapons than it would be for the other ones. That said, for every weapon, it does have some potential regardless, because the Rocksteady Mantle also will proc Counterstrike when you get hit with the skill active, even though you aren't going to be flinched from the hit itself while wearing Rocksteady Mantle. So Great Sword and Switch Axe and anyone using Rocksteady Mantle can get consistent value from the skill and more than you might expect. If anyone knows of more weapon attacks that this does also work for, feel free to leave it in the comments so we can add it to that list even further, but this is pretty crazy as it stands already. After that, let's talk about Critical Element. This increases your element damage when you get a critical hit, and like Charge Master, this is seemingly functioning, but just having a really obtusely low impact on actual damage. Again, this is against the training dummy in the training room, so higher elemental weakness than most monsters will have, and I am using Critical Draw to guarantee 100% crit, and then no other skills at all. This attack hits for 92. Add on the full 3 ranks of critical element and it goes up to 93.2, which is less than a 1.5% increase to the overall damage of the hit. It's minuscule. Let's try and dig even deeper though to get a bit of a better picture. Remember, 92 is our baseline for crit with no other skills affecting it on this weapon. If we add on 3 ranks of thunder attack but not crit element, that number goes up to 95.2. Then if we add crit element with thunder attack, it hits for 96.9. Nice. Because we know for a fact that the amount added by thunder attack is pure element, the gain from 92 up to 95.2 is a pure elemental increase. If we put crit element on without thunder attack compared to with thunder attack, we go from 92 to 93.2, which again is a pure elemental increase. We can use these numbers together to figure out the amount of a difference crit element makes to element specifically with a bunch of boring math, but put simply, this puts it right around a 15% increase on specifically elemental damage only on crits, which even in an elemental build that has high crit just isn't that strong compared to other weapon skills. For example, the exact same setup without thunder attack or critical element, but just pure crit boost, instead hits that same attack with 102.1. Attack boost instead of crit boost still hits for 98.5, which isn't bad either, and both of those options are again higher than fully investing in crit element and element boost, even against the training dummy, which is again weaker to elements than most monsters. All that to say, critical element is a skill, like Charge Master, is something a lot of players have claimed is not doing anything, but the truth is that they are doing something. It's just that the thing that they do is so little in the larger calculations of damage that it feels like it's doing nothing. So yeah, I don't recommend using it right now. After that, we have the focus skill. I've heard people generally claim focus is working inconsistently, and the two things that I have heard most called out for this are switch axe and bow. Specifically the sword gauge for switch axe, the power gauge, and from some testing and looking at the literal pixels gained from each attack with and without focus, yes, focus does seem to increase your amp gauge, but it just doesn't matter at all because you can get the gauge full with one double circle combo anyways, with or without focus, and so it doesn't have any actual meaningful impact for the weapon, despite being a functional interaction. As for bow, I've heard people say that focus on bow increases the speed of the dragon piercer animation, which is an interesting claim as in wilds it is not a charge attack. So I checked this multiple times over, and from what I can tell, there is maybe, possibly, like a 5-frame difference between using 3 focus and 0 focus, if anything. It is really tiny. It's honestly really hard to tell if it is even making any difference at all once it gets to being that tiny of a difference. But the point is that this is like maybe percentage points faster of speed, not worth 3 weapon skills of investment at the very least. In other words, I'm pretty sure the skill is working as it's supposed to. There's just some community confusion about what it actually is meant to work with for it to begin with. Next up then we have Partbreaker, and this is either one that is properly bugged or just poorly listed in the skill description. The actual description of Partbreaker reads that it increases part damage, which it does do. Part damage is a hidden health bar that each monster part has individually, and doing enough part damage is what lets you break specific parts like horns or cutting tails. So this doesn't literally count as a damage increase, it just affects the part health specifically. That said, the other half of the skill in Monster Hunter Wilds says that it increases your damage dealt when destroying a wound with a focus strike, and with 3 ranks this should be a 30% increase, at least according to the description. In practice, however, here's destroying a wound with full Partbreaker, here's destroying a wound with no Partbreaker, here's destroying a wound with full Partbreaker again. Oh no, sorry, I lied, that was no Partbreaker, but you couldn't tell because there is no difference in the damage numbers at all between having Partbreaker or not when using your focus strike on a wound. Partbreaker does not increase damage at all currently. So for now, I'm assuming that this is a bug until told otherwise. Only use Partbreaker if you want to break parts, not for the actual damage increasing part of it. Next up, we have one that has proven to be really interesting to test, which is Rapid Morph. This skill increases the speed and damage of morph attacks for Charge Blade and Switch Axe. Supposedly at full ranks, this increases the morphing speed by 30% and the damage by 20%. So I ran some tests and got real funky with it, but this led to what feels like a pretty solid conclusion in the end. The damage is perfectly accurate as far as I can tell. It is a 20% increase in the damage of morphing attacks. Yep, sure, no problem agreeing with that for the most part. But what's interesting is the speed part. I tried multiple different morph attacks with the Switch Axe, and I was finding that the percent speed difference was variable depending on which morph attack I did. That's when I went for the Wild Swing Morph Sweep, as it is a long animation that I could look at a little bit better. In previous games, the Rapid Morph skill increased the speed of the entire animation of every morph attack entirely, but in Wilds, it seems to only speed up the literal switching motion between the two states of the weapon. Some morph attacks are just one hit, so the morph animation itself being sped up affects those a much larger amount. Some attacks, like morph sweep, don't do the actual morphing part until the final slash, and so I realized when I put these two morph sweeps on top of each other and made the one with focus a little bit transparent, you can see both of the animations are in perfect sync for most of the animation from the start of the morph attack until that final motion itself of transforming to the sword in that last hit. That's where the rapid morph clip pulls ahead really quickly. In reality, what this means is that rapid morph's value depends on how many morph attacks you do and what kind of morph attacks they are too. It increases the damage of the entire morph attack by 20%, so that's still good for that reason, but the actual speed increase from this skill is incredibly variable, depending on how short the animation is to begin with and how much of it counts as the transformation itself. Then we have our final two skills of the day, the ones that aren't in alphabetical order, so if you don't already know what these skills are when I say the name, I recommend going away before I actually explain what they do. First then is going to be Antivirus. The issue with this skill is pretty well known as of this point, really we've talked about it before. The skill lists itself as making it easier to drop the frenzy debuff and cleanse it when you're afflicted with frenzy, but then also increasing your affinity for each rank, claiming 3%, 6%, and then 15% affinity when you do so. Rank 1 is correct, rank 2 is correct, rank 3 is some sort of strange mistranslation or localization issue that happened because when you clear the frenzy debuff with level 3 antivirus, you get 25% bonus affinity total. Frenzy itself, without the antivirus skill, when cleansed, gives you 15% affinity, which means that antivirus as a skill at rank 3 is actually giving you 10% affinity, not 15% as it states. I've also heard from some players as well that the Japanese version of antivirus in the game says 10% instead of 15% for some reason, so interestingly this means that it isn't even a universal bug, it's just a translation issue for the English version. Antivirus is still good as a skill, but it is important to know the actual values when you're putting together your builds and trying to think about what's worth using. In a very similar vein to that, let's talk about the only skill related thing that actually did change in the patch today from what I can work out at least, which is Resuscitate, Lord's Fury. This was a skill in previous Monster Hunter games, but it is now one of the group skills in Wilds. Specifically, this is shared by the beta armor sets of all of the Apex monsters. If you activate this effect, you get 10 bonus raw while afflicted by any sort of negative debuff. Before the patch, this had a really funky interaction with Frenzy status specifically, where you would get 10 bonus attack while afflicted with Frenzy because Frenzy is a debuff, but then after you cleansed Frenzy and got the buff reward of bonus affinity, Resuscitate still stayed active. For whatever reason, Resuscitate was treating the positive affinity buff for beating Frenzy as a debuff as well, and with Gore 2 set and the remaining 3 armor pieces as beta Apex monster armor for this bonus activation, you could then have a permanent plus 10 raw attack as a result of this bug. After the patch today, this has been fixed completely, and as it probably should be, you only get the attack bonus while you are suffering from the negative parts of Frenzy, and the effect deactivates as soon as you cleanse the debuff. Then finally, we have what is probably the biggest conversation around a skill that I've seen so far, which is Flayer. This skill was originally pretty broken in the pre-release build that creators had access to, and then the day 1 patch definitely changed its functionality. The main thing that changed was making it so the focus strikes themselves would not be able to create wounds through Flayer, and that is a very fair change in functionality, honestly, it makes sense. But from this point, players assumed other things had changed too. They started testing the skill a bunch, and a lot of conflicting and unusual results came up from this, with a lot of people landing on the idea that Flayer level 2 was better than having Flayer level 5, convinced that it just made wounds faster, and that Flayer rank 5 was worse due to some sort of bug. This led to some actually official responses from Capcom, and much more proper testing done by a lot more players as well, and it turns out that this was not actually the case at all. This is not how Flayer works. As a result of all of this, there's even a new addition to the frequently asked questions section of the official Monster Hunter Wilds website, making a statement about Flayer. And despite the fact that this is listed as a question, I find it really funny that it's clearly not asked as a question, it's just an announcement. Certain attacks are excluded from Flayer's skill effect. This knowledge completely changes how you would go about testing the skill, and with this information we now have a much better concept of how Flayer works, by which I mean it is working as intended entirely. This is what the devs want the skill to work like, this is how they decided it was balanced. Rank 5 of Flayer is better than rank 2, and it always has been despite what players thought. The extra damage procs from it seem to work like a hidden bonus blast status, a chance of applying buildup every time that you hit with the attacks that can work with Flayer, and then a pop of damage when you reach the threshold, but importantly, it doesn't work for a whole bunch of different attacks depending on your weapon. Specifically, Flayer's wound generation and extra damage proc buildup do not have any effect for focus strikes for any of the weapons, for descending slash with insect glaive, which I would argue is the highest priority use attack for the weapon right now, especially as it's the thing that combos into rising spiral slash. For gunlance, Flayer has no interactions with shelling damage of any kind. For bow, dragon piercer and thousand dragon specifically does not work with Flayer. For dual blades, blade dance doesn't have any interaction with Flayer, and same with wild swing for the switch axe, as well as, and this is a fun one, literally all axe mode attacks on the charge blade. The entirety of axe mode does not work with Flayer. There may be even more attacks for other weapons like this, but this is all the ones that we know for sure are excluded from Flayer right now. That said, we also know that this is intentional because of the official website update. They've not responded by saying they're looking into fixing Flayer, they've responded by saying they're looking into fixing the tooltip because the skill is working as it's supposed to. It's just the way that the skill is. It's weird, but hey, at least now we know. And that pretty much does it for today, everyone. Just a discussion and some testing with all of the skills that I've heard people either talking about bugs or issues with, or even just misunderstanding them, and trying to clear it up as much as I can through testing and applying my own knowledge of the game as well. Hopefully this helps out, and feel free to leave any of your own thoughts on this topic down in the comment section below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.